Hello, everyone. Great that you're all here. Thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar today on real-world data-driven solutions and technologies in patient recruitment. We'll be talking about how they change the game to accelerate patient recruitment by supporting patient centricity and improving site efficiency. Just to introduce myself, I'm Vicente, and I'll be your moderator today. Today, we'll be hearing from two speakers. Ian Rentsch, CEO of Clinerion, will speak on the Patient Network Explorer, a global hospital network generating real-world patient data insights. You'll also hear from Keyla Deucher, founder of Bioserv SMO, and she will detail a case study on using such a real-world data-driven solution. The presentations will last for about 40 minutes, and we'll dedicate some time to answer your questions at the end. The webinar will end at the end of the hour. So before we get going, some housekeeping. All attendees are currently muted and should remain muted during the presentations. If you have any questions, you're very welcome to send them to us. You can do this via the chat function on the control panel on the right of your screen. Just select all organizers, and it's probably already selected there. And just write your question and send it off to us. We'll collect the questions and do a Q&A with both speakers at the end of the presentation. We're looking forward to a lively discussion, so send lots and lots of questions. Last note, we are recording this webinar. The recording will be made available to you all very shortly after. So let's start with our first presentation. Ian Rentsch is Clinerion CEO and has over 20 years experience in clinical research development, working in multinational companies, including large biopharma in emerging markets. And he's also spent 7 years at IQVIA. So Ian, please start.
Thank you very much, Levin. Just checking, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, everyone. We have a big crowd today with over 120 people who have signed up for this webinar, which is very impressive. It's, of course, with attendees from around the world, many emerging markets as well. So thank you again for this. I'll be presenting today, the first part will be about the technology itself and the use case of the technology, and of course a very important part will be the case study, the reality seen from a user from a hospital that is using this technology to better manage efficiency in patient recruitment at the site level. So today I'll start with the first problem, the typical industry recruitment funnel, right? Average industry benchmark data shows that from 100 patients identified or available, the industry is failing upon pre-screening with 69% loss, followed by additional loss of the consent process, the screening, and finally the dropout. So the overall conversion ratio is from 10 patients you can identify, you will end up randomizing 1. The use of technology, and most especially real-world data-driven solutions, allow us to increase essentially the bigger part where you're losing patients, which is the pre-screening stage. So today I'll be explaining a little about the technology, federated system that allows access to electronic medical records, and my co-speaker will be presenting, as I said before, the view from a hospital user. The Patient Network Explorer, and that's what we call the platform, the architecture. So Clinarion's federated system allows users to send one query, and when I say a query is one question, I mean it could be clinical, but also real-world question, to multiple hospitals at the same time, each using their own terminologies and languages. So this already solves one of the key industry challenges around interoperability of data, pulling it together from a web dashboard perspective on the cloud, coding, in this case, through structured data, ICD-10 codes for diagnosis, demographic criteria, as well as lab test results, procedures, and medications. So by doing this, as I said, one question, which can be a list of complex inclusion and exclusion criteria, is sent over the platform, and one gets results within seconds, because this allows you to connect real time to real patients from the real world. In this example here, I'm showing how we code inclusion and exclusion criteria. We chose in this example 16 hospitals in Turkey around gender female, between 40 and 75 years old, with diabetes mellitus, a lab test criteria being a glucose level, and a procedure. A procedure around bed fees was selected here. No medication, but this is a very simple example that shows results around where these patients would be in terms of at which hospitals they are, as well as the demographic distribution. And this, the first thing it really helps with is with the real-world data-driven design of the protocols. We know from industry benchmarks again that over half of the clinical studies or protocols get an amendment through the life cycle of a study. So this would allow to, as a first criteria, do it right from the start, allowing, of course, that we decrease the delays, such as 80% of the trials are delayed from an industry benchmark, often related to patient enrollment issues. We are able to connect to any database model, and with this I mean we connect with the hospital information system. The hospital information system may or not be mapped into different proprietary connector models, such as HL7 or OMOP common data model. I mean, of course, OMOP is one common data model which is very popular. We, as Clinerion, have been certified as an SME with Eden, which is the European version of the Odyssey network worldwide. So we can both map the source, this is the hospital information system data, into OMOP, and then map it into the Clinerion data model where our platform works, and then on request also accommodate any open exchange formats for the data export or output, again in OMOP or I2B2 or HL7. So that's very, very important, and this is very often a question we get. How do we connect and convert to the different data models in different sources? So this is very, very important. I was just talking about the data flow within a hospital setting, right? So we, at the implementation stage, we connect to the hospital information system and perform an ETL. So it's an extraction, transformation, and load of data into a ETL, through an ETL server into a Clinerion server hosted within the hospital firewall. And this is where the first de-identification and anonymization of data occurs. And this is upon implementation. Once it's implemented, the system works and lives within the hospital firewall. So patient data does not leave the hospital. That's very, very important. In a distributed federated system, that's how it works. And from a web dashboard, from the platform, technology platform, you can run the queries I showed against the Clinerion server, in this case, which is the anonymized, de-identified server, receiving aggregated data points back. So for each question, as I showed before, around diagnosis, around procedure. For each line, you get a matching number of patients and then aggregate it to match the whole study match. This is, again, important to say that there's no patient data leaving the hospital firewall. It's only aggregated data points that come out into a secure private cloud where the dashboard lives. A very, very important key differentiator towards other platforms or other database type of solutions is that through the use of our technology, the hospitals can re-identify those patient matches. So from the outside, pharma users, ourselves, will know exactly where these patients are, but we'll only have a matching patient number. So only by re-engaging with the hospital users, people like Keyla that we present today, we can have the hospital re-identify those patient matches. So as an example, if we have a patient match on a complex protocol criteria, let's say 27 patients, the hospital is going to take that query results and re-identify it with what we call the ANID technology, which is an anonymized identification technology, which has a patent, which allows the hospital to take that query with the matching patients, which is still de-identified and unlinked, take it back to the Clinerion server within the firewall to identify the anonymized patient records. Because within the Clinerion server, we have anonymized the identified patient records, and by identifying those and matching and seeing the hits, the matching criteria, by the use again of a software, easy to use software that's embedded within our technology, they will identify within the secure system who those patients are for pre-screening. And this is why at the beginning of the presentation, I showcased how the use of technology and real-world data has an impact on the pre-screening. And that's where the industry is losing most of those patients. 69% of the patients go lost within that first eligibility criteria, which of course the eligibility criteria cannot be mapped correctly without the use of technology. So normally those 100 patients I showed at the beginning would have been patients diagnosed with any criteria. But once you apply restrictive inclusion criteria around medication, comorbidities, lab test results, those start dropping. And as as hospitals start deep diving into the records, they lose them. But with an automatized platform system technology, also by the use of artificial intelligence, allows the user to increase that hit. Again, that's something we will show further in the real case example. From a data coverage perspective, where does Clinerion have coverage? Which countries? So currently you will see or should see here 20 or 21 flags. This is our current coverage. This is 20 flags on this one. And these are hospitals who have joined the global Clinerion network available on the Clinerion Patient Network Explorer. Some of these are in implementation. It takes us sometimes 2, 3, worst case 6 months to implement a system at the hospital. It very much depends on availability of the IT staff at the hospital. But once it's online, there's very low maintenance time to maintain the technology. Our hospitals are key partners within what we do. Hospitals who join our network receive the visibility, also the attention and priority from our customers, top pharma, top CROs. And of course, this is so popular in emerging markets because there's this feeling across the world that emerging market locations have a lower probability of success versus central markets in Western Europe or the US. So for a hospital to join our network, it brings them clearly a benefit of showcasing that they have the matching patients. And with a real-world data-driven solution that shows you have the patients, this brings confidence to pharma and CROs to go for those emerging markets. Normally, the reason why top pharma and CROs don't go or are not encouraged to go to those markets is because they rely on better historical results from central markets, and this is a very conservative industry. So they keep on going to the same places they've been going historically. So as I said, this brings further visibility and of course, from a hospital perspective, efficiency in the management of patient populations and increasing recruitment at the site. Some of our global partners include both technology companies as well as data companies. These are data companies that haven't integrated their data, at least not yet, with the Patient Network Explorer. The vision and mission, into our platform is really that we create a real-world data ecosystem that brings together not only the hospital data, as well as claims data, wearables and connected devices data, registry data into one location, which is searchable and interoperable. Some of our partners include regional CROs as well, and as I said, tech partners. Getting now closer to the patient and why EHR-driven, real-world data-driven analytics support patient centricity. The first thing is, EHR enables a move towards digitalization and trial systems and make it easier for patients to participate in decentralized or virtual trials. This allows us to better connect both connected devices and other platforms into the trend of using virtual trials, which in some cases or most cases would allow patients to participate in trials from their home, for instance, and also create stronger patient engagement. Patient-centric trials are defined as being designed specifically around patient needs. And this means it includes patient-reported outcomes or other patient-related measures, or are even co-designed by the patient. So, EHR analytics offer great improvement in efficiency for those processes and ensuring the right patients are identified. So this is why we say this relates and has to do with patient centricity. Patient centricity is on the rise and well distributed around the world. And this is allowing also emerging markets and other geographies to participate more in research. As I said, in the past, many trials were defined or designed around the needs of pharma, essentially. And we see more and more focus on patients being, trials being designed around the needs of a patient. It's also, and I'm showing some data sources from Informa and Sideline on Trial Trove, and the last one, which show that drug trials designed to be patient-centric have a higher likelihood to launch across multiple therapeutic areas. So this has to do with both time to market and hitting the market. So with this, I wanted to hand over to Keyla. Keyla will be presenting, her view, the case study of using the Patient Network Explorer technology at the Hospital São Vicente de Paulo in Brazil, and will be also explaining a little as well around how patient-centric trials in her example are also on the rise in her region, in Brazil, in Latin America, and how the use of technologies and real-world data-driven solutions are intimately connected with that. So thank you very much, and let's hear from Keyla.
Just before, Keyla, I just wanted to come in briefly and just say that, first of all, thank you, Ian, and also that I'm sure many people do have many questions for him. So please, as I mentioned earlier, please send any questions that you may have to us via the chat function, the control panel at the right of your screen. You can select, or I think it's already pre-selected for all organizers. And that will come to us, and then we'll put everything together in the Q&A at the end. Keyla is, just to introduce Keyla as well, Keyla is the founder of Bioserv SMO. She has 16 years of clinical trials experience working with multinational biopharmaceutical company and in the direction of site management organizations. So she works closely with hospitals on recruitment and will present some real life examples, as you heard from Ian, on how the Patient Network Explorer has really resulted in more efficient trials and better outcomes for patients. Over to you, Keyla.
Okay, thank you, Levin. Thank you, Ian, for the great presentation. Hello, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about our experience with PNX in our site. Our case study is from Hospital São Vicente de Paulo. Before that, we are thinking about what is patient centricity, a little bit about that. Patient, usually in the patient centricity, is the center of a clinical and medical development. So all the clinical trials are redesigned and they're processed around the needs of the patients. So we do not talk more about a clinical trial being designed to respond some scientific question, but the clinical trial being designed around the patient needs to respond a scientific question. This is really different. Usually, patient centricity will simplify the patient journey and will improve the patient involvement and actually the engagement during all the drug development. But when we think about patient centricity, we can discuss the real life scenario as well. So we can go to the next slide, please. Thinking about we are in an era of global clinical development. So all of the studies are developing in Australia, in United States, in Brazil, in Africa. So we have we have cultural difference in mind, and actually the patient communication and trial materials must be created thinking about that. So what is a patient less complicated journey, for example, in a patient in United States may be a burden for a patient in another region, like Brazil, for example. So we are having a lot of changes in the process in the clinical trial. So we have e-diaries, wearable devices, bring your own devices. So the patient journey will change with these new tools and may not be less complicated. So we have different patient journeys, it really exists. And we have different clinical practice and treatment across countries and regions. So how can we have all of this information together, and how can we create a protocol that can be flexible or efficient to have all of these differences? So how to deal with significant regional difference? We can see it in the next slide. Maybe the electronic health record analytics are the only live way for pharma to access patient experiences. This is a really important information. And actually we can have an evidence-based feasibility. We are going to discuss it in some details. What is an evidence-based feasibility? How can it help the sites and the sponsors in developing a good protocol? Actually, with those information, we can have a protocol optimization, a better site selection process, and actually a more accurate forecasting of recruitment timelines and numbers. So how is the site's perspective and experience? So we are going to discuss now how is the evidence-based feasibility in our site, and actually how is the electronic health records analytics for patient recruitment. We can go ahead with the next slide. Hospital São Vicente de Paulo today is the first hospital in Brazil to use the real-world data technology for patient recruitment in clinical trials. We have today more hospitals, but we were the first ones to have this experience. As you know, Brazil is located in South America, and our side, the Hospital São Vicente de Paulo, is located in the south of Brazil, in a state called Rio Grande do Sul. Our region has a population of 2.5 million persons, and our hospital is a reference for this population in the north area of the state. So this is the presentation of Hospital São Vicente de Paulo, and we have Bioserv. Bioserv SMO is a supplier of research strategic management for medical institutions. So we do the bridge between the sponsors, CROs, and the sites. We made clinical trial management and actually the strategic management for clinical research sites. So we have, since the startup phase, site feasibility, regulatory, administrative, financial, quality assurance, recruitment strategy, and many other activities we perform for the sites and actually for the sponsors as well. So let's discuss a little bit our experience in the integration process with PNX. How does it start? The timeline for the integration process depends on the kind of electronic health records of each institution. For example, if there is a previous experience with integration with that specific electronic record, it may facilitate the process, but actually the PNX can be integrated with any kind of electronic health records. In our case, it took more or less 2 months, and the validation process is a really important step in the integration. It took about 1 or 2 months after the integration, and actually the duration will have a big influence of database quality. Because if you have problems with your database, probably you will need more validation and more time spent in the validation. And the validation, it's continuously. As much as you use the PNX, as much you will understand how your database is and the issues in your database. So the hospitals will be able to find the queries and to perform their own queries. And in every case, the hospital can see which queries are being executed by external user as well. So if we have a sponsor that is performing some queries and our hospital is appearing in that query, we will see it as well. But this was the integration process in our hospital. And we have some specific issues that can happen with any other site that is important to indicate. We have the plan A that is having the codes of the medications, the codes specifically for the procedures in the structure fields. But actually, as soon as we start performing the integration, depending on the quality of the data of your electronic health system, we will have some issues. So we have plan E, plan B, and the real life that probably will happen with more sites as well. What were our findings during and after the integration? We had some problems with structure fields in the electronic health records. What happens? We have lack of completeness or incorrect data. For example, wrong diagnosis. It happens usually, frequently in Brazil. We have wrong diagnosis in the beginning of the patient attendance, and after that, and after the patient gets hospitalized or it's not hospitalized anymore, this information is not corrected in the electronic health record, so we have a wrong diagnosis. Other issue that we have duplicated codes in the structured fields. So What is it? For example, for every lab exam, glucose or creatinine, we have a specific code. And in our case, we have glucose and glucose-related hemoglobin with the same code. So when we query at the system, the result range and the units are different. So maybe the result will be less available. So we need to handle those problems. And we have another specific issue in Brazil regards the non-structured fields. We have relevant data included in non-structured fields. And for now, this is not searchable by artificial intelligence yet. It's going to be, but for now, it's not been possible to search it. So we usually will not have some important information in the queries. And this is regard the issues about electronic health records. Maybe we can find the same issues in other institutions in Brazil, in all over the world as well. Or maybe in other countries we have different issues, but we will need to understand better how our electronic health record data, and after that we can implement the integration. And during the integration, the validation process is really important, because if you do not understand your validation, you will probably not have good results with the search. So this is really important. We can go ahead with another slide. Before and after the integration, the PNX integration, how our trial staff spend the time for the patient search. Without the PNX, so we usually have the database research. We look for patient charts, disease codes, laboratory results. Everything was done manually, or we ask for some lists for the IT people at the hospital. And then, after that, we have referrals, physician and health professional. We have network with health units, social media, TV and radio advertisement. But we spend the majority of our time with the database research, because we have more data on that and we need to do it in a different way. But after the implementation of the PNX, we were able to spend more time with other ways of patient recruitment, because the database research was done in an efficient and quick way. So we could have more information through the database, and actually we could spend more time with other ways of recruitment. So it maybe give us more patients from other sources than the database. Because of that, we were able to focus in other processes, or to improve other processes, because our database research was getting better. You can go ahead with the next slide. And we can better now understand how the recruitment timeline happens without the PNX and after the implementation of PNX. We spend a lot of time with pre-screening. As I told before, we have a database research based in disease code, laboratory result, and patient active search, patient chart active search. So if we have, for example, a study with cardiology or endocrinology, we will have 100, 200 patients to look for. And then we spend a lot of time in pre-screening. And then we have the validation and the screening. But after the implementation, the pre-screening procedure was quicker, because we have this information found in 1 minute. And after that, we can spend more time with the validation process, and then we have more time available for screening procedure. This is really interesting. As well, this is regards the database research. And as we have less time spent in pre-screening, we were able to spend more time in other ways to patient recruitment. The validation process of the patient it took the same time because we have to qualify them to the screening procedures. But the pre-screening timeline, it helps a lot in order to have more patients evaluated. And when we think about the impact of using the technology, our patient recruitment, we could see that we have 24% of potential patients that were findable by PNX. So we have an increase of 25% of our patients, and actually this 25%, the majority of the patients were only accessible by PNX. What means that 71% of the patient found through PNX were only found through this way. We could not find it by other sources like patient charts manually or referrals or other ways. So this is a really interesting result because we can see that PNX saves times in comparison with other recruitment methods and actually improve our ways to find the patients in the database and actually make the process easier to find patients in other ways as well. When we can think about the positive impact of enrollment, we have a comparison between our case study and the industry benchmark data. We can see we have increase of the potential patient at the end of the process. So we have 2 times more patients completing the selection process. Of course, it can be different in other sites, or it can be different depending on the therapeutic area and the inclusion and exclusion criteria. But if you have more searchable or more identified patient, we have great possibility to increase the number of patients randomized and more patients to complete the study as well. We have some limitations results after the integration, because how can we compare the randomized patients before and after the integration? The reasons why I started to look for new possibilities to include patients was because of the changes in the clinical study profile. Now we have a restrict inclusion and exclusion criteria. The new protocols are more restrict. We have more studies with less potential patient and actually expectation of high screening failure rates. We have, for example, one study that expect to have 90% of screening failure. So this is the reason why we cannot compare the randomization rate before and after, because we have a big change in the profile of the clinical studies. But the major impact of the real-world data in the queries can be seen in the slide. When we have, of course, this will reflect our experience regarding acute diagnosis, for example. If the patient is attended in the emergency unit, as we have a problem with the co-diagnosis, this will not be so helpful. Although if we can combine procedures and laboratory results, the majority of the patients can be found. When we think about therapeutic areas, we have the majority of the patients found by cardiovascular studies. Why? Because the way that our electronic health record works is we have a lot of information in cardiovascular that can be found in the structured data. But when we think about oncology, neurology, or inflammatory bowel disease, usually the majority of the inclusion and exclusion criteria are in non-structured field, so are free text, and sometimes it won't be found by the system. So we need to understand how our electronic health record works, and then we will be able to have a better use of the data-driven solution. We can go to the next slide. And this is a really common question that I usually receive. I just indicated that the number of patients in a database maybe is not the most accurate number of patients that appears in the query in the PNX. So does the site run the risk of underselling when it comes to disclosing their access to patients? For example, if a sponsor make a query and in my hospital, I probably will have more patients than the number that appears in the query. Well, we have to consider the investigation. We can go ahead with the information in the slide, please. We can consider some important information. Does the investigator has a non-private practice? Could the investigator refer subjects, or can the investigator evaluate the geographic area and determine places of potential patients? Because sometimes we have a lot of patients that are not in the database field, so they will not be searchable, but they can be found. So the decision should be driven by all available data. So historical, recruitment, and electronic health records analytics. This is the evidence-based feasibility, and this is really important for the site and for the sponsors to know. Regarding the balance of data-driven solution implementation, can go ahead, please. This is not the ultimate solution for patient recruitment, because the effectiveness of the data-driven solution may vary due to the base quality, due to the database quality. If we have a good database, we will have more searchable patients. If we do not have a good database, we will probably have less patients found. But it enables us to diagnose the database for improvement, and this is important too for patient identification. There's another really relevant information. It's the natural language processing. We are working to have making free text notes searchable by the artificial intelligence in the near future, because for us, and I believe not just for us, for many other hospitals, this data is really important to find patients as well. And actually, the patient identification process in clinical research sites is completely changed after the integration. If you have a process now, you will have a completely different process after the integration. Another important information that we usually receive is sometimes some hospitals have do not know exactly how the security process works, and sometimes they do not accept the solution. It's important to understand that the querying process is performed through the identified data. This is important. Ian have indicated it before. So the data security is clarified within each institution. And actually, the data-driven solution is a no-return path for site recruitment process. As soon as we have an electronic health records, you should implement this data-driven solution, because it will really help to understand your own electronic health records. And actually, as soon as you have it, you can implement some data-driven solution to help you to recruit your own patients. So this is really a non-return path. And to the conclusion of this webinar, we have some benefits. Leveraging electronic health record data for patient recruitment and patient centricity is based on upfront strategic thinking. We could see that patient centricity gives us better results for inclusion rate and also engagement of the patients. And actually, we have better scenarios and can better understand the patient population for a given indication, and we can determine possible factors that will impact the study design. We can increase the confidence that real patient exists that will satisfy the target protocol condition, because we know that lasagna's law is real. Sometimes we can have 100 patients, but when the study begins, we have less than this number. So it will increase the confidence of the real patients, that they really exist, and we can show them for the sponsors. It will reduce costly protocol amendments, because if you really know how many patients can be included, we can manage the protocol before it's finalized. And of course, it can increase the predictability of a trial enrollment, identifying and pre-screening patients earlier. So this platform, we believe that can help a lot this big problem in the clinical trial, that is the patient recruitment. Okay, this is the conclusion of our webinar. I think we are open for the question and answer.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Keyla. So now, yeah, exactly, we move into the Q&A section. Thank you all for all the questions that you have sent so far. If you haven't yet, please do keep sending them through. Use the chat box on the right, select all organizers, and we'll go through as many as we can right now. As mentioned, the recording of the webinar will be made available to you all. So I'm just going to start right now. We have had a number of questions coming through already. Thank you. The first question, and I guess this is targeted at Ian. How many queries can you send to a site to receive information on the potential patient population? To be specific, how many inclusion/exclusion criteria can you define upfront on which the hospital patient database can be screened, or is there no limit?
Thank you very much. That's a very, very good question. And the amount of inclusion criteria makes, nowadays are very complex. Study protocols are getting more complex, and the good news is there's no limit. Of course, we see normally from 10 to 15 inclusion criteria to be more of the average. It can go up to 30. But the more complex it gets, of course, the lower patient match you might get. But from a technology or tech perspective, there's no limit. So that's very good, and I think that already answers the question.
Very good, thank you. Next question. I think this is also for Ian. Can a query be sent by a CRO? If patients are found and re-identified, how is the link made with the investigator? Do you know upfront if a specialist wants to participate in the trial?
That's also a very good question. So we work with some CRO partners who both either license the platform or on a project-specific opportunity work through us. In both cases, we help engage those sites and investigators with our customers. So the first step of either protocol design, optimization, or a feasibility, where I want to go, does not require any contact to the site. But of course, once you want to qualify those, re-engage with those, validate those patients after selecting them, will require site engagement. And this is facilitated through us. So essentially, we facilitate introduction to people like Keyla, our champions at the sites, to do the validation first, and typically they would be selected as a trial site. They would go through ready approval, and then when they're upon patient recruitment stage, they would use this tool to facilitate enrollment.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Ian. Next question is actually one for Keyla, I guess. The question is, how is the integration process? How long does it take? Does the hospital need to invest many hours in the integration process?
The integration period will depend of the kind of electronic health record that each institutional have. So in our case, for example, we have electronic record that had previous Clinerion has previous experience with this kind of integration. So usually it's easier for them, or it will quicker. But it will take about 2 months, and we need a specific person for the local IT. We need to indicate one person of your hospital that works with the IT, and this person will enable access for the electronic database, but it will not need a lot of time spent for the hospital. They will have some hours spent in that, but the majority of the process is done through Clinerion or Clinerion people authorized by Clinerion in order to perform this this process.
Thank you, Keyla. The next question, does the sponsor have direct access that they can filter directly the patients without permission from the hospitals? I guess this is one for Ian.
Yeah, so I would remind the Patient Network Explorer works on de-identified anonymized patient records. So on that first instance of querying and knowing where those patients are, which is essentially the feasibility process, there's no special authorization. So the authorization is done by the hospitals upon implementation. They allow us to do this, and of course want that visibility to showcase they have the patients with our pharma customers or CRO customers. So there's no specific authorization. Of course, upon engagement and later, when this turns to be a project, well, yes. For the pre-screening, there's before you do pre-screening, you have to go through ethical committee approval, and just you know, the normal way, but not for that you know, feasibility, knowing where I want to go before you even engage with the hospitals. I know someone had asked if the hospital requires EC approval to use the system. And the answer to that is also, because I saw this question and I know it's related to this, it depends on the country, but in many cases we see hospitals approving at the EC committee level the installation of our platform. Of course, in Europe, they look at things such as GDPR compliance, which we are, and the like. So a lot of time is sometimes lost pre-implementation just for having everyone happy and comfortable with implementing the system. This comes from the IT, from legal, from ethical committees, but we are certified and we have done several audits that assure that we in what we do follows a GDPR compliance.
Thanks, Ian. There was actually another question from somebody. We only have about 4 minutes left. I wonder if there's a question from another person. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. I don't know if we want to go more deeply, or maybe we can also contact that person directly with more info about that. Maybe one quick next question then is, let's see, there's a few here that we didn't cover yet. How is the real-world data that is collected in trials exported? I'm not sure if they're asking how it's exported into our system or how we export the data.
Yeah.
But maybe you want to talk about that. Yeah.
So essentially, data. So if we are talking about any real-world data type of trial or real-world evidence type of trial, where once you have defined your patient population, your cohort using our system, and have engaged with the hospital, typically this happens in observational trials, so non-interventional ones. You want to extract according to the protocol, and this means it will go to ethical committee approval and so on. And you want to extract some endpoints, you know, typical real-world evidence, late-phase research. Our system will either through an API connect to EDC systems, ECRF, such as Medidata Rave or Inform from Oracle. So that can be done with no problem, or it can be exported directly from our system into XML formats for further use. Of course, all within a project-specific approval. But to answer the question, yes, the output from our system is usable to match the endpoints of any given observational real-world data or real-world evidence type of trial.
Okay, I think we have time for one more quick one. So this is the one for Keyla, and it's how many site personnel do you need to work with PNX?
Well, in our site, we have one person that works with recruitment. So we have one direct person working with the system, but all of our study coordinator works with that as well. But it depends on the size of the site. But it's a user-friendly system and easily to understand and to start using them. But today we have 2 specific persons that work with the system directly.
Great, thank you. So I think we're going to close it down right now. I see we have a lot more questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to each of you individually to answer your specific questions. As I mentioned earlier, we will have this recording made available to all of you. I think we should close it down now because it's the end of the hour that we booked with you. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Looking forward to lots more conversations with each and every one of you in the future. Thank you again very much, and have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you very much, everyone.